Hi, this is Matt, developer of Streets of Rogue 2. Thank you for checking out this second devlog. Previously, I talked about my inspirations for Streets of Rogue 2, the challenges of setting off to create an open-world game, and just what you can expect from this stupidly ambitious sequel that I am currently working on. Devlog number 2 is going to be all about procedural world generation. Essentially, how the game creates an entire giant randomized world that's unique every time you start a new game. I'm going to get a little bit more technical this time around, but I will try to make this somewhat comprehensible, so let's see how that goes. Before I start, be sure to wishlist if you haven't already. Join our Discord if you want. There's links below to all this stuff. Also, just remember, as with the last time, all the footage that you see is very much a work in progress. So if you see things that don't look right, just try to block it out of your memory or something. So first off, a few words about procedural generation. Procgen is a tool that I've been using for a very long time now. The original Streets of Rogue made very heavy use of it in creating environments, quests, itemization, you name it. I try to make use of it wherever I can, as a means of adding variety and surprises to the game. And as I found, it's actually very easy to create a lot of randomized content for your game using procedural generation. Most of the methods that I'm using are not big secrets. There's plenty of information about them online, plenty of examples out there if you're a developer and you want to try this stuff out for yourself. What's more difficult and time-consuming is creating content that's fun and balanced and interesting, and not just like a random, jumbled, dull mess. The type of randomness that I'm doing is actually a very tightly controlled sort of randomness that needs to deal with a lot of edge cases and problems that can pop up. Just bear in mind, I'll be going over the broad strokes of world generation, but I'm also going to be glossing over a lot of the small details. Okay, so jumping right into it. Streets of Rogue's map, at its default size, is meant to be like a scaled-down version of a very small country, which still ends up being kind of enormous. So how do you make a small country starting from absolutely nothing? Well, there are some algorithms out there that can help us out. Take note of these: Perlin noise, blue noise, cellular automata, diamond square. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's plenty more out there. All of these are easily Googleable. And if you're writing a game, you can find code that you can just copy and paste and use these algorithms yourself. So what do they actually do? Well, they essentially generate randomized textures like what you're seeing here. See, I created a little program in Unity where I can feed data into different algorithms and it just spits out results like these. This is using the Perlin noise algorithm to generate this noise that you're seeing right here. And as you can see, I can adjust different values, like say this one right here. Let's see what happens. All right, so I'm just going to refresh right here, and yeah, it looks a little bit different. You can just keep adjusting this all day and getting different results. There's really a wide variety of different types of results you can get with this. So for this particular image, I wanted it to be 140 by 140 pixels. When I ran the Perlin noise algorithm, what it actually gave me is an array of 140 by 140 numbers. All right, so let's just say, pretend this is pixel 20 on the x-axis and 30 on the y-axis right here that I'm pointing to. But let's just say the algorithm gave me the number 10 at that position. And I've said in my programming, okay, every time I get a number that's between value 8 and 12, I want to stick a blue pixel at that position. And magically, I end up with something like this. And maybe these gray areas represent numbers 0 through 7, and then anything after 12. Yeah, magically I get these things that look like blue lakes. Yeah, you don't really need to understand how this works, but it looks pretty cool, doesn't it? And that's basically how the different features of the world map get generated. You can see like these lakes right here look pretty similar to the ones that I just showed you in the little program that I wrote. So this world map that you're seeing in the game, this gets broken down into what I call regions, which I'm selecting right now with my white box. Now, this world map that you're seeing has about 140 regions horizontally and 140 vertically, somewhere around there. So you see where I'm going with this? Each of those pixels from the test image that I showed you could represent a region on my map. So those lakes from the test image could be transferred over 1 to 1. So I'd have a world map with lakes on it. And I can do something similar if I want to create forests, for example. Like you see these green areas here, these could be forests, or mountains, or just any kind of like geographical mass. You just take different values from the Perlin noise. Like I mentioned, using values 8 through 12 to get the lake. Well, suppose maybe I use values 2 through 5 to get the forests. Or maybe we just run an entirely different set of values altogether and get a totally different result, and then just find a way to combine the first result with the second result. I ran an entirely different set of values to get the ocean that surrounds the country, which ends up looking something like this in my test image. See there, we are now an island, essentially. Now back in the game, I've combined a result that got me the surrounding ocean with another result that got me the lakes. So now I have both the lakes and the ocean. And the point is that, once you have that array of magical numbers that the Perlin noise spits out, you can find just a ton of uses for it and do all kinds of crazy stuff with your map. Okay, so at this point we have kind of a natural looking map, but there's not really a whole lot going on here. So the next thing we want to do is place cities and towns around the map. And for that, I use another algorithm which is called blue noise. Essentially, this places a bunch of pixels around in random positions while also ensuring that those pixels aren't too close together. So as you can see here, all these little green pixels, that's being done by the blue noise. And if the placement of these pixels that you're seeing seems maybe a little too uniform looking, just remember, I don't necessarily need to place cities in all of these locations. I can just randomly choose a bunch of these and ignore the others and still get a pretty good result. Alternatively, I don't really even need to use blue noise at all. I could just pick completely random XY positions across the 140 by 140 pixel grid, just completely at random, and then just check to make sure that they're not within a certain distance of existing positions. Probably get a similar result. But really, the thing I want to get across is that when you're generating procedural environments, there's all kinds of ways to get the result that you want. And you really just have to play around with it a bunch and see what feels right. Okay, so now as you can see, we've placed all of our cities on the map. And also at some point, I needed to figure out how big I wanted the cities to be. So standard sizes for cities are 1 by 1, which you see here, 1, which is 2 by 2, and 4 by 4. And for larger cities, I just kind of like to graft a bunch of regions together. I actually impose limits for how many cities of different sizes there can be on the map, so you don't end up with too many enormous cities or too many small cities or whatever. By the way, all of that is going to be adjustable for players when you're first generating the map. So yeah, if you want a map with no cities, you can have that. If you want a map with a ton of cities, a ton of large cities, you can have that. Yeah, and same goes for landscape generation. You'll be able to make whatever you want there as well. I don't think the NPC artificial intelligence would really know what to do with a map like this right now, but hopefully one day it will, and then you can recreate Waterworld or something. Okay, so cities are in, but they're looking maybe a little bit isolated. Now, is it possible we might be missing something here? Possibly roads, maybe? So let's take a look at this random city right here. The game is going to say, okay, I need to figure out what are the closest cities to this one. So it's going to, I think, pick randomly maybe something like 2 to 4 cities that are in closest proximity. And going to say, okay, I need to figure out how to draw roads to those cities. So here's the final result, and now we're connected to a bunch of different cities. The way this happened was through the use of an algorithm called A*. Now, A* is very popular, very widely used in video games to do pathfinding for NPCs, mainly. In fact, I'm actually using it to do NPC pathfinding in this game. So I'm using the algorithm for something completely different in this case. So this map right here that you're seeing is essentially a giant grid. What the algorithm is going to do is it's going to find all the positions on the grid between point A and point B. Let's say point A is this city, point B is this tiny little city right here. It's going to find all the positions on the grid between those 2 points. And it's also going to be able to avoid obstacles that are contained at certain positions on the grid. For example, this lake. I've set this lake, these squares right here on the grid to be an obstacle, and pathfinding is going to be able to say, okay, here's position 1, I'm going to need to go around here, and these are all the positions I'm going to need to path on to get to point B. And once we're done with the roads, we can use A* to create things like a river right here, which connects 2 lakes. I'm aware of how ridiculous this looks. The river appears to be very overly polite, I guess, just stepping its way around the city, don't mind me, I guess. Yeah, I'm still making improvements to this stuff. I could create a small dirt path which leads away from the main road to apparently a gumball machine military outpost. Yeah, in case you haven't noticed, these are not final icons. This is all placeholder right now. This is supposed to be the main character. I should mention that once all the roads are placed, I'm going to designate certain regions to contain landmarks of one sort or another. That could mean, alternatively, this could be like a cabin in the woods, or I could place an outpost full of rogue robots or a diner at the side of the highway. A landmark could really be like anything of note that's not like part of the city. And, again, to place that, I could use blue noise, or I could just place them randomly. Again, it's not quite that simple because, there's a lot of rules that dictate where I can and can't place things. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, we have this big zoomed out world map with tons of regions. How do you figure out what's in the regions? Well, to explain that, I need to introduce the concept of chunks. So if you played the first game and you messed around with the level editor, you might know what I'm talking about. So regions are the largest form of measurement in the game, and chunks are the second largest form of measurement. And the smallest form of measurement is tiles. Right, so each region is comprised of 4 chunks by 4 chunks. This right here, what you're seeing is a chunk in the level editor. And each chunk is comprised of 16 by 16 tiles. So 16 across, 16 down. And here in the level editor, I can create handcrafted content. So it could be a building like this cabin that you're seeing right here, or it could be a graveyard, it could be literally anything that's handcrafted. So let's just say that during the world map generation, the randomness led to a cabin being placed in the woods. Now when the player actually walks over to that spot, the game is going to load in this chunk that I created in the editor, which you might recognize. It's the same one that we were looking at before. It's just been flipped and rotated. Now right now, this is actually the only cabin chunk that I've created so far, but I will be doing a whole bunch more, and then the game is going to be able to pick randomly from a pool of cabin chunks. And by the way, all these trees and rocks and foliage that you're seeing here, I'm actually using blue noise to help figure out the placement of these. This is still a first pass. I do want to improve the placements at some point. I think they're a little bit too uniform for my liking. I want to make them a little more scattered and random looking. But yeah, I just wanted to mention you can find all kinds of uses for these algorithms once you're aware that they actually exist. Now, this is actually a really simple region, because all we've got here is the cabin, and the algorithm that I created for this particular region is just going to say, okay, place this cabin chunk at a random position within the region limits, and also randomly flip and rotate it so that it can face different directions. That's pretty much it. Each type of region in the game has its own individual algorithm for chunk placements, and some of them are really complicated, most notably the cities, which I would like to run through real quick. So let's take a look at this 4x4 region city. Now as you see, there's roads coming in from a few different directions, over here, and over here. And if we zoom in, you can see this is what it looks like a little bit closer. I have the road coming in over here, here, and here. So the first thing I do when I'm trying to figure out how these roads are going to look is I figure out exactly where these entrances are going to be. And then from there, I need to essentially connect all of these entrances so that there is a main path. In this case, we have a few different entrances, so the main path basically goes like here to here, and also here and here and here. So there's always a way to go in the city one way and come out another way. Then once we have our main path, I can go in and add some random kind of like side roads and loops and things, which you see over here. And this was actually not done using A-Star or any other system that I've mentioned here. This was just done using my own proprietary little system that I made. In some cases, if you want a specific result, the best solution is to just roll out your own solution. Here's a view of what this looks like in the actual game. You can't quite see the whole map right now because the game only loads a certain number of chunks at once, but you kind of get the idea. So now that we've done our road placements, we can actually place buildings into the city, which is nice. The buildings that you see here, I've already placed, and these are built essentially the same way as the cabin that you saw earlier. Each of these that you see here is handcrafted. So the number of buildings that are in a city and the size of those buildings and the placement of those buildings and the type of buildings, that's all dependent on the type of city. Like for example, an industrial town might have a lot of office buildings and factories in close proximity, whereas a rural town might have a small number of farms that are spread far out from each other. Now, in order to place these buildings, we need to find a random location that's directly next to a road chunk. like this right here. And once we find that location, we need to flip and rotate it so that it faces the road. And once we've reached a certain quota, I guess, of roadside buildings, then depending on the type of city, we might want to place some more chunks randomly in other locations, like this one right here, not next to any roads. Right now, this looks like just a regular building, but in the future, it'll probably be like a park or something like that, because, that would make sense as something that would appear in a location like this. And throughout all this, we need to make sure that we don't place two buildings on top of each other, or place two police stations directly next to each other, or something like that. Again, there's tons of rules here, and if if the whole thing sounds at all even remotely simple to you, believe me, it's not. Like, to get it working on a basic level isn't too bad, but the number of things that can go wrong here is kind of astronomical. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of code devoted to making sure that these buildings get placed properly. It is no joke, and I assure you that I am far from finished with this as well. What you're seeing here is pretty much a first pass with very little fine-tuning. There's just too much open space in spots like this right here that shouldn't happen probably. Obviously, like I was saying before, this will probably end up being a park or something like that. There's only a very small pool of building chunks right now. You're probably seeing this is the same building as this, and this is the same as this, and they're all the same. It's just a lot of repetition here. Fortunately, the really difficult coding stuff is in good shape at this point. But, the devil's in the details, and, as far as the way these cities are generated goes, there's still a long way to go. The same really goes for any aspect of world generation. I'll definitely be chipping away at this stuff for years to come, probably. Whether that means, tweaking the Perlin noise values or accounting for some new edge case that the player finds in the city generation. I'm always going to consider world generation to be a work in progress. But so far, I'm real happy with the results. The world is starting to fill up with a more and more unique and diverse set of biomes. We have a whole bunch of different types of cities in the game now, everything from rundown slums to sleepy suburbs, and, we have natural environments like lakes in the middle of forests, cliff sides, island beaches, and I haven't even touched on dungeon generation. I didn't want this video to run too long, and that's kind of its own thing, but I'll just say this. There's already several completely different types of dungeon algorithms that I've written, including one that has a whole lock and key structure, so there should be a lot of variety in that area of the game. Now, before I wrap up, I just want to take a little bit of a left turn and talk about player impact on the world map. Specifically building your own structures. Basically, how it works is this. You acquire a plot of land somehow. Maybe you pay for it legitimately, maybe you gain it through unsavory actions. That system is still in the works. But the actual building is actually really easy, and you can see how I'm doing it here in this footage. Please ignore all the placeholder interface junk at the bottom left. Now, originally, I was going to make it so that you had to walk up to each individual spot where you wanted a wall to be and, place it by hand. But this just felt way more streamlined and convenient, whereas the other way was just kind of tedious. And as far as what you can build, I am striving to make it so that almost every type of wall or floor or objects that you can find in the world can be built. Maybe not right away at the start of the game, but you can eventually gain the means to do it. Also, I want to allow players to place pre-made buildings rather than do the building themselves if they want. So if you hate building things or you have no talent or whatever, you won't have to do it. And maybe in the future, I will allow players to actually zoom out and place buildings like they would in a city building game. Like maybe if they become the mayor of a city or something. Can't promise that. It would probably be a ways off if I do it, but I do think it would be fun and cool to eventually implement that somehow. Also, I just wanted to mention, although the game doesn't allow you to build anywhere you want, I will probably include a mutator with the game that actually, does allow you to do that, just as long as you're okay with a hefty dose of jank. In that case, you'd be able to do ridiculous stuff like what I've done here. As you can see, the artificial intelligence, it can handle NPCs and other cars in the road, but a brick wall in the road, that is a bridge too far. And also, I don't think the AI is accounting for this particular edge case right here. I seriously wonder if there's anyone who didn't do this in The Sims. I was not planning to allow NPCs to soil themselves or starve to death, but, I guess we'll see if there's demand for it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this look into the world of Streets of Rogue 2. Remember to wishlist the game on Steam, and stay tuned for the next devlog, which is coming, I suppose, whenever I find the time, which in this case appears to be 2:47 a.m. Oh dear, I should not have done this. Okay, good night everybody.